في نهاية 2014 كان داعش قد سيطر على رقعة من الأرض تماثل حجم بريطانيا.
أعلن دحر تنظيم داعش في كل من العراق وسوريا بعد أن هزم في آخر معاقله.
داعش يحضر جيلا جديدا لمواصلة ممارساته.
نشر تنظيم الدولة الإسلامية في العراق والشام داعش مجموعة من الصور التي تظهر إعدام عناصره.
You mean ISIS?
Okay, let's be honest. Unless you've lived under a rock for the past decade, first of all, surprise, we're in a pandemic, but also, you've probably heard of Daesh, which is an armed insurgent militia that operates in Iraq, Syria, and beyond. Assuming you're an English speaker though, you've probably heard of them as ISIS, also known as the Egyptian goddess of having a very unfortunate name. Daesh, of course, is the Arabic name for the organization, but it's not as simple as that. The word Daesh is a new, rare creature in the Arabic language, and that creature is the topic of today's video, which is about the Arabic acronym. I was inspired to make this video by this really interesting article that I read recently about the history and features of the Arabic acronym. I was doing a little research after wondering for a long time how acronyms could possibly work in Arabic. I felt like they shouldn't work because of the Arabic script. See, an acronym is a word that functions and is an abbreviation of a longer phrase, and it's formed by combining the first letter of each word that makes up the phrase. But in languages that use the Latin alphabet, in order to distinguish acronyms from other words, they're almost always written in uppercase letters. So for example, AIDS is an acronym for autoimmune deficiency syndrome. The issue with the Arabic script though is that it has no uppercase versus lowercase letters, so it's not really possible to visually identify that something is an acronym in the same way that in English, for example, we can distinguish between AIDS and AIDS. Not to mention that letters are always linked to each other in Arabic, so if you just wrote a random string of letters, it would look pretty much exactly just like a regular word. That's especially problematic because most of the time vowels aren't even written in the Arabic script, so it's very normal to see a string of several consonants, whereas in English, there's no way PTSD could be mistaken for a normal word. Conversely, letter-by-letter transcriptions of Arabic words into English tend to look a lot like acronyms, which is also why the script can be very hard to read for beginners. What that means though is that if you were to write a random string of connected letters in Arabic, it wouldn't necessarily be read as a random string of consonants. Instead, an Arabic speaker would instinctively insert vowels that would make the word legible. A very real example of this is the term UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Even though in English there is no obvious way to pronounce the term other than just spelling it out, the name of this agency in Arabic is made pronounceable by inserting vowels as though it were an Arabic word, transforming it into UNRWA. What's funny is that actually that pronunciation has been adopted back into English. So even in English, people familiar with this organization call it UNRWA too. That shouldn't be surprising though, because in a way we do the same thing in English. That is, we don't actually spell out the letters if we can actually pronounce the term as a word. That's why, although PTSD is PTSD, we don't say AIDS, it's just AIDS. So there are actually two distinct types of initialisms, which is the general name for terms formed by the initials of the phrase they abbreviate. You have terms like OECD or UNHCR, which are called alphabetisms because you actually have to spell them out. And then you have actual acronyms, right? Such as FIFA or UNESCO, which are true words in the sense that they can actually be pronounced rather than spelled out. In fact that you can really pronounce them normally has in some cases obscured their origin, as in the case of the word laser, which actually stands for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Did you know that? So the distinction I'm trying to make between English and Arabic then is the fact that in English you can have alphabetisms and acronyms, but in Arabic only acronyms are really possible. That's because what requires us to spell out the letters in English to begin with is the lack of vowels between the letters, whereas in Arabic, since vowels aren't usually written to begin with, vowels are automatically inserted into strings of consonants that can't be pronounced otherwise, instead of spelling out each consonant one by one. And that's why even when UNRWA is written in Arabic letters, it's not waw nun ra waw alif. It just becomes UNRWA. So we're already getting a sense of the tendencies that govern the creation of acronyms in Arabic, since we can already see that they're going to have to work within the established rules that govern the formation of Arabic words in general. Actually though, as I suggested in the beginning, acronyms are still a very new concept in Arabic. That's why UNRWA, which was established in 1949, is in fact UNRWA in Arabic. Instead of being an original Arabic acronym based on Arabic words, it's just an Arabic pronunciation of the English initialism derived from English words. And that's precisely because it's from a time when Arabic hadn't yet developed its own tradition of making acronyms. In fact, according to the article, the first true Arabic acronym only came into use in 1968. Even today, though, acronyms aren't as common in Arabic as they are in English and other languages that use the Latin script. And where they do exist, they're most often created by or for institutions like political parties, media organizations, or NGOs, and then other organizations such as, of course, Daesh. So where does Daesh come from? As you can see, it looks just like a true word rather than an acronym. But if you actually divide up the letters, you can see that each letter stands for a word in the phrase الدولة الإسلامية في العراق والشام, meaning the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. By the way, that's why ISIS is actually a mistranslation, because although the Arabic term Hashem is sometimes used as a traditional name for Syria, it doesn't actually refer to contemporary Syria specifically, but to the entire eastern Mediterranean region, the Levant, which is considered historically as a single cultural region. But notice that the letters have actually been adapted to fit into a pre-existing Arabic word pattern, which in this case is actually the active participle pattern. Strictly speaking, there's no reason that the Hamza Alif should be turned into a regular Alif, or that the Ain should get a Kasra, except that that's how someone would naturally read these letters together, as though it were an active participle, a word pattern that they're already used to. So the word Daesh shows us one of the main tendencies in acronym production in Arabic, which is that the actual initials of phrase are flexibly molded to make new acronyms follow already existing Arabic word patterns. Our second example goes even further to adapt its initials into already existing word patterns. It's also maybe the most well-known Arabic acronym, Hamas. Yes, Hamas is an acronym, but if you thought the initials were HAMAS, you would be quite wrong. Hamas is short for Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya. But wait a second, that means that technically the three initials should be Ha, Mim, and Hamza Alif. But Arabic acronyms are really very flexible. You can tweak your initials as much as you want, as long as you get a word that works in Arabic. So whereas the acronym Daesh, the same word Islamiyya gives us a long Alif, in this case, the same word gives us a long Alif and a Sin, hence Hamas. It should be mentioned though that theoretically something like Hama could have worked too. It would be similar in shape to a word like Rida. But here's where the second main tendency in acronym formation in Arabic comes in. When creating an acronym for itself, an organization may try to adapt the letters into a word with a meaning that represents the organization or is just generally positive. I'm sure that's why they decided to initialize Islamiyya with Alif and a Sin in order to get Hamas, which is an Arabic word that means enthusiasm. As you can see, it's not as clinical as in languages with the Latin alphabet where you just literally just slap on every initial on there, and even if it doesn't work as a word, you just recite the letters one by one. In Arabic, nope. Creating acronyms is an art, really. I would honestly compare it to the crafting of a logo or an organizational motto. It's no coincidence then that the acronym Daesh is much more literal with no meaning or function other than to refer to the militia, because the acronym was actually developed in the media rather than by the group itself. Our last example for today shows how all these factors come together. In addition to Daesh and Hamas, the following acronym is the last of the three most well-known acronyms in Arabic. Not only that, it's the one that I told you earlier was developed in 1968, the first true acronym in Arabic. Can you guess what it is? It is, of course, Fatah, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. As you can expect by now, the acronym is made up entirely of consonants, Fatah. But there's something fishy about this word. The name of the organization in Arabic is Harakat al-Tahrir al-Falastini. So shouldn't the acronym be Yeah, that's no good. As you can see, the meaning of acronyms is so important in Arabic that it doesn't even matter if you flip the whole order of the initials to get I know that seems weird for an English speaker. I mean, just imagine if we made acronyms by taking the actual initials of words and just scrambling the letters around until we got a word we liked. UNRWA could be Renoir. UNHCR could be churn. But I don't think it seems as arbitrary in Arabic. As I said, in Arabic, acronyms can be a sort of branding. So the message that is conveyed by the acronym is arguably as important as, actually abbreviating the name of your organization. That said, I think the reason I found the article so interesting is that it made me consider a lot of things about how acronyms work in English that I had never thought about before. So everything I said about how acronyms in Arabic bend and rearrange their initials according to word patterns and semantic constraints, well, actually we see something very similar in English, but instead of adapting the initials themselves, In many cases, it's the original phrase that is formed in such a way that will produce viable initials. That's how the very catchy CAPTCHA was created, and also why it's no coincidence that the acronym of an animal welfare organization would be PAWS. As weird as it may be for Fateh to reverse the order of initials, it's also weird for you to name your whole organization just so that you get a nice acronym out of the name. Just some food for thought. Anyway, let me know if you like this video. I do read a lot about linguistic topics that I would love to discuss in terms of Arabic, so I could definitely make other videos like this one in the future if you do find it interesting. Either way, بشوفكم المرة الجاية. اهلا حبايبي، شكرا للجماعة اللي بيحضروا القناة. اذا بدكم تكملوا تشوفوا هالفيديوز اعملوا سبسكرايب، واذا شفتوني مؤخرا تفضلوا روحوا شوفوا الفيديوز الماضية بالبلاي ليست. وتذكروا اني عملت مصادر لتعليم اللهجة الفلسطينية، بتقدروا تلاقوه بالموقع تبعي اللي مكتوب تحت بالدسكريبشن. وبشوفكم المرة الجاية.